Okay, so this is our first video in the next big unit of our course, which is going to be on world religions. So that's what this unit is all about. So this is our introduction to world religions. And what we're going to do first is kind of think about the purpose and function of religion. So that's what we're going to do in this first video, is just kind of think about how religions are structured, what they do, and how they do it. So first, we got to keep in mind that this is a history class and not a theology class or a religion class. So we're thinking about all of these things in terms of historical significance, not religious significance. So keep that in mind when we start talking about religions that are still practiced today. This is not in any way an endorsement of any religion. I'm not trying to convert anyone to a particular religion. We're only thinking about these things from a historical standpoint. And any figures we talk about are simply historical figures. We're not thinking about them in terms of faith or spirituality. So religion for us serves two purposes. Religion serves two purposes. One we've already talked about. So we talked about religion in terms of government. So one way that religion is used is to help keep social or political order. So we looked at that when we were looking at legitimate authority or legitimate political power. The idea that leaders are connected to gods or religious power, and that helps the people accept them as a leader. We've already covered that one, so that's that one we've done. The other purpose, and this is where we kind of think about the less political side of it and the more social or cultural side of religion, is that religion explains the unexplainable. Religion helps to explain the unexplainable. So, we don't understand how or why food grows or why rivers flood. We don't know why people die or what happens to them after they die. So religion helps people to understand why these things happen. Most of the religions we're going to be looking at in the ancient world, and even moving into some of the more modern periods, are polytheistic. So most of the religions we're going to be looking at least this week, most religions at this point are polytheistic, meaning they have many gods. Another thing that we might say about them, instead of saying that they're polytheistic, they have a pantheon. So a pantheon is like a family of gods. And usually the gods are related through marriage or through siblings, uh, sometimes both. But most of the religions we're going to be looking at this week are polytheistic, meaning that they have many gods. And a lot of these polytheistic religions with a pantheon of gods are similar in how these gods are used by the societies. So the gods often represent aspects of society that are important to those people. So, for instance, Egyptian gods are usually pretty calm and I guess you could say balanced. And there is a lot of discussion, I guess we could say discussion, in Egyptian religion about life and death and rebirth. And if we think about this cycle of life and death and rebirth, it really reflects the flooding cycle of the Nile. So, for instance, the Nile floods and we grow crops, we eat the crops and they die, and then the next cycle begins with the Nile flooding again. So the Nile being the center of Egyptian society, it stands to reason that Egyptian religion is also going to reflect that cycle. If we look at a society with a more unpredictable river, like the Indus River is much more unpredictable. Which leads to more chaotic, violent gods. Another important part of understanding religions is the idea of creation stories. So, for instance, creation stories usually reflect what is most important to that society. So, a society that we really haven't looked at too much are those in the Western Hemisphere. But their creation story is very interesting and indicative of this idea. So, for the Maya in Central America, their creation myth, called the Popol Vuh, said that people were created by the blood of the gods. And so the gods bled on the earth, and the blood created water and corn, which is what made people. So you put those two things together and you create people. And it stands to reason that people were created of water and corn. And so that's what people need to live. They need to eat corn and drink water. It's what humans are made of. So it stands to reason that they need to continue to eat that stuff. Now, when we think about how priests in Central America would worship the gods, priests would carry out elaborate bloodletting rituals to celebrate what the gods did. So they would cut themselves and bleed on the earth in the same way that the creation story said the gods did. So most of these religions are polytheistic. They are usually representative of what the society looks like. So Egyptian religion seems to be more or less focused on what the Nile is doing. The Indus, it's very unpredictable, like the Indus River. We also see creation stories, and we see the same idea that what's important to the society is represented in their religion. So, in this case, water and corn. This is also why when we think about the Maya, but especially the Aztec, who are the successors to the Maya, we often think about their rituals of human sacrifice. And so it stands to reason that bloodletting and human sacrifice would be connected to these societies because it's part of their creation stories. There are a few exceptions to this, so we'll just kind of broadly talk about these. Most of these exceptions we're going to talk about next week, because next week we're going to look at the kind of Judeo-Christian side of religion. So this week we're mostly going to be looking at Eastern religions, so the religions or philosophies of China and India. And then next week we will look at the philosophies or religions of the Middle East and the Mediterranean. So we'll look at Judaism, Zoroastrianism, and Christianity. But we'll just introduce the idea of monotheism as an exception. Because in the ancient world, monotheism was not very prevalent. It was a very uncommon thing. So the best example of a monotheistic religion is Hebrew monotheism. Which will eventually become known as Judaism. So we'll talk more about this next week. Zoroastrianism is another exception. Both of these are going to heavily influence the formation of Christianity and then Islam. So there is a kind of common idea here of monotheism that's going to kind of create Judaism and then Christianity and then Islam. There is another exception, and that's in China. So in China, they don't really have the same conception of gods as other societies. So they don't think about God the same way that, Hebrews would, or the Egyptians would, or the Maya would. So they don't think about gods that way. So they think about kind of like a heavenly power. And I think we mentioned this when we talked about the Chinese connection to religion providing legitimacy. We've talked about the mandate of heaven. So instead of a connection to a god or a group of gods, Chinese leaders had this approval of heaven. The idea that heaven is not kind of a anthropomorphized being like a god. It's just kind of an amorphous power source called heaven. So we will talk more about this idea in a few videos. So we'll talk about this idea after we finish talking about India. So we're going to do India next. So we're going to spend a couple of videos talking about India, and then we'll talk about China. And after that, we will talk about the kind of Mediterranean basin and talk about the Middle East and the Romans and the Greeks a little bit, kind of how that all turns into what we know today as the Judeo-Christian religious family, or the Abrahamic religions, because they're all kind of connected to each other. All right, so I'm going to stop there. So the next video, we're going to be taking a look at India and Hinduism and Jainism. So until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.